U.S. Army Rangers are masters of survival. Built to cope with life deep behind enemy lines, they are the lords of ambush and assault. Got an enemy position that needs eliminating or an insurgent that needs seizing? Send for the Rangers. From the beaches of D-Day to the jungles of Vietnam and street fighting in Somalia, U.S. Army Rangers have taken the fight to the enemy in every corner of the globe. Today's Army Ranger is equipped for life in the lair of the enemy. The compact and accurate M4 carbine, lethal up close, deadly at range. The devastating M249 machine gun, rapid fire to keep heads down. The hard-hitting Javelin anti-tank missile, punching well above its weight. All this makes the Ranger a match for the most formidable foe. Now, Weaponology will go back through Ranger history to find out how 18th century ambush tactics, high-tech weaponry, and awesome physical training have come together to make the U.S. Army Rangers the toughest light infantry unit in the world. The original Rangers in colonial North America created the template. Unconventional companies, they fought unconventional wars with unconventional tactics. They thrived in places where the usual rules of engagement do not apply.
Rangers do two things through history. They patrol and they raid. And so the idea of ranging or being a borderer means protecting the boundaries of your nation or your tribe.
The most famous of their number was an 18th century commando considered the granddaddy of counterinsurgency, Major Robert Rogers. Rogers raised his first band of Rangers in 1756. The mission? To protect British settlers from raiding Native Americans and their French allies.
In America, on the frontier, the standing army style of linear warfare did not work in the woods because the Indians didn't play by the same rules. They would fight using ambush.
The settlers had to adapt to survive. They needed to meet the raiders on their own terms. Rogers' men soon became the masters of patrol and ambush.
The idea was to take frontiersmen who were able to live in the wilderness and to fight like the Indians. They became raiders. They began to perform long-range penetration raids.
Rogers' Rangers adopted the same tactics and wielded them with great success. Their victories helped turn the tide in the struggle for control of North America. Camouflage, stealth, and the brutal tomahawk had become their stocks in trade.
The tactics they developed were taken largely from the Indians, the skulking way of war, ambush techniques, fighting in from very close, using the musket at 50 yards or less, and then moving in to finish up with the tomahawk and the long knife.
The tomahawk was the frontiersman's friend, a tool for cutting wood and making shelter. Rogers' Rangers learned from the Indians how to use it as a savage close-quarters weapon.
Not only as a hand weapon for hand-to-hand combat in close quarters, but also a skilled frontiersman or Indian could throw it into an enemy to knock them out to about 25 yards in some cases.
The development of rapid-firing weapons in the 19th and 20th centuries seemed to spell the end for the tomahawk. But 200 years later, the 17th century tomahawk was updated and retooled for the modern battlefield. Bobby Branton is a combat knife and tomahawk designer. He has been involved in the manufacture of the tomahawk that was reborn in the jungles of Vietnam.
Back in the late 60s and early 70s, the gentleman that I got to be friends with, his name was Peter Lagana. He invented the Vietnam tomahawk.
Rangers in Vietnam were attracted to the tomahawk for the same reason as Rogers' Rangers. A weapon that can perform many tasks means less kit. Less kit means you can move faster. Moving fast means staying alive.
He wanted a good tool, something that would be a little bit more versatile than just a regular knife. Something that you can use for trenching, you can use it for breaching, and you can use it for hand-to-hand combat.
The 2006 model Tomahawk is popular with troops in Iraq and Afghanistan looking to boost their equipment. Tomahawks have come a long way. Composite materials now make them almost indestructible.
This would have been a wooden tomahawk. It would have more than likely would have broken in half.
Bobby was emailed this story by a soldier in Iraq who owes his life to his tomahawk.
They were going into a small little hut. When they knocked on the door, nobody would answer. So the soldier kicks the door down. The bad guy is right there in his face, and he just simply pulled his tomahawk off of his vest and reached up and hit him, to split him right in the head.
But the tomahawk makes rare combat appearances today. The evolution of rapid-fire weapons keeps the enemy at arm's length. Many units used the term Ranger in the centuries after Robert Rogers. But it wasn't until Captain William O. Darby in 1942 that it became part of the military mainstream once again. Darby was the father of a new breed of Ranger.
The Rangers are very similar to the British Commandos. Their primary responsibility is operating behind enemy lines. Of the war in Europe, at least half the time I was behind the German lines.
Darby was commissioned by the U.S. Army to create an elite raiding unit on the lines of the British Commandos. But Darby's Rangers used 18th century American raiding tactics as the U.S. Army drove through occupied Europe.
We became part of Patton's Third Army. He looked at it as his eyes and ears. When you're behind the German lines, the best thing to do is hide during the day and maneuver at night. We would take patrols of 10 to 12, up to 100, and explore what was in front of Patton's army.
The Rangers were formally disbanded in 1945. In the Korean conflict, 3 companies of Rangers were raised to raid deep behind communist lines. But skip forward a decade to the jungles of Vietnam, and the bushcraft and hit-and-run tactics of Rogers' Rangers would be needed once again.
And those same tactics that Rogers and other Rangers developed are very applicable to some of the areas we've served in since. In Vietnam, with the thick brush that we had there.
American forces fighting the communist menace were dragged into an unconventional conflict against guerrillas in South Vietnam and Cambodia. It was a situation that cried out for ranging patrols.
The idea of being able to fight as Rangers came back during the Vietnam War because of the jungles, the swamps, and the guerrilla tactics of the enemy.
American forces in Vietnam tried to fill the gap with long-range reconnaissance patrols, or LRPs, and Echo Recon companies. Many of these ranging companies' leaders had been to Ranger School. They had Ranger DNA.
When I went on a mission, I would take my platoon to find, locate, and take care of the enemy. Establishing patrol bases and looking for signs of the enemy, setting up ambushes. All these techniques for doing this type of reconnaissance were all based on things that I learned in Ranger School.
By 1969, the need for Ranger units was officially recognized, and these units became part of the Ranger family tree. The legendary 75th Ranger Regiment was born out of LRP and Echo.
Each one of these companies was assigned to a division or a separate brigade in Vietnam. And they built up into full-sized units and served as Rangers. Ever since February 1st, 1969, then, the United States has maintained their Ranger companies in wartime and in peace.
Rewind 2 centuries. Major Robert Rogers had learned to think and act like his enemy. He adopted the weapons, tactics, and techniques of the Native Americans.
The patrolling that we did was not unlike those ancient Rangers because you had to understand the enemy. You had to understand how the enemy thought. You must learn his tactics, techniques, and procedures. That's the only way to defeat him.
We didn't wear helmets or flak jackets, anything like that. And I had a Soviet AK, which was my preferred, but anything we could do to confuse the North Vietnamese helped.
Rogers' Rangers were frontiersmen and hunters with an innate ability to read nature. Graduates of Ranger School were taught the same skills. skills they honed in the jungle.
By looking at the layout of the land and using the experience that you had, you could predict where the trails would be, where the bunkers would be, where the avenues of approach would be, the good places to set up ambushes.
The birds, when the birds were chirping, we were happy. When there's all of a sudden a lush silence, that was bad.